Mr. President, I rise to speak on the issue that is before us today on the floor of the United States Senate, and that is the issue of high gas prices. I was home in Wyoming, filled up again this weekend, as I do most weekends, and today the average price of gasoline, regular unleaded gasoline, nationwide, $3.91 a gallon. That's about 20 cents more than it was a month ago. People at home in Wyoming see the prices continue to go up week after week. High gasoline prices are causing hardships for American families and American businesses. When families pay more at the pump, they can't spend money on other goods and services. For families dealing with kids and a mortgage and bills, they know the specific impact as they fill their car or truck and see that price rise to the point where it's almost, if not more than $100 to fill the tank. Also, when companies pay more for gasoline, they have less money to expand their businesses, and that hurts job creation in this country. Wyoming families and Wyoming businesses know this all too well because in Wyoming we drive longer distances than most Americans. The President also knows this, and that's why he continues to give speeches on energy. It's clear that the President is defensive on this issue. Well, I've heard the speeches, and I say pay less attention to what he says, pay attention to what he does. The average price of gasoline, regular unleaded gasoline, over 100% higher than it was when President Obama took office. I'll say that again. The price of gasoline is over 100% higher than it was when President Obama took office. It is clear the President's policies are contributing to higher gas prices. But instead of changing course, President Obama, Democrats in Congress are doubling down on bad policies and desperate schemes. Here's an example. One Senate Democrat, someone across the aisle from me, has said that let's and ask Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. It's exactly what it said. It said a solution is to have the Secretary of State ask Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. And now President Obama and Senate Democrats want to raise taxes on American oil production. So we're going to ask Saudi Arabia to produce more and yet raise taxes on those who are producing American oil. So the President, the Democrats want more oil from Saudi Arabia. And they also want to make it more expensive to produce American energy. The legislation on the floor, to me, doesn't make sense, and the American people recognize that it doesn't make sense. Americans know that if you want less of something, you tax it more. They also know if you want to increase the cost of something, you tax it more. Raising taxes increases the cost for consumers. And that is the effect what President Obama and Senate Democrats are doing with this legislation. They are proposing increasing gas prices by increasing taxes. Even the author of this legislation has said, quote, nobody has made the claim that this bill is about reducing gas prices. So then why would President Obama want to increase gas prices 7 months before a presidential election? Well, it appears to me that it's because his political base fiercely opposes fossil fuels. Now, that shouldn't surprise anyone. We have seen this before. And of course, I'm referring to the President's rejection recently of the Keystone XL pipeline, bringing energy from Canada into the United States. This Keystone XL pipeline would have created thousands of good-paying jobs for Americans. The President said no. The Keystone XL pipeline would have facilitated oil production in Montana and North Dakota. The President said no. The Keystone XL pipeline would have increased supplies of oil from Canada. The President said no. To the point that the Prime Minister of Canada actually went to China to ask if they would buy the energy from Canada if the United States isn't interested. So why would the President reject it? Well, because his political base has fiercely opposed the pipeline. Now the President wants to have it both ways. He would like to please his political base as well as the American public. That's why the administration wants to go hat in hand and ask Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. It's also why the President is considering plans to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, this would be the second time that President Obama tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Last June, you recall, the President released 30 million barrels of oil from the reserve. Prior to that, it had only been tapped twice for emergencies since 1975. So between 1975 and June of 2011, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has only been tapped twice for emergencies. It was tapped in 1991 upon the outbreak of the Persian Gulf War, and it was tapped following Hurricane Katrina. Now, in both instances, those were real disruptions of the supply of oil to the United States. But when President Obama tapped the Strategic Reserve last year, there was no substantial prospect of a supply disruption. His decision at the time was based on politics, as would be his decision to tap it now. That's why Jay Leno recently called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve President Obama's strategic re-election reserve. Well, my Republican colleagues and I think there are other ways to address high gas prices. The other is that when they tapped the Strategic Reserve last year and took out the 30 million barrels, they didn't actually refill it. So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is not filled up right now. It is lower. Just to fill it back to where it should be, its baseline level, would cost actually almost $1 billion more than they got when they sold the oil last year. I believe there are things that we should be doing and can do that will enhance, not jeopardize, our nation's security and specifically our nation's energy security. We understand that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is for emergencies, not political disasters. And we understand that if you want more of something, or if you want to lower the cost of something, you don't raise taxes on it. What you do is you make it easier to produce the product. That's why my Republican colleagues and I support making it easier to produce American energy. And it is why we are asking the President to make it easier to produce American energy. Not harder, not more expensive, but easier. A few weeks ago, we learned that the oil and gas production on federal lands and waters is down. Specifically, we learned that there was a 14% decrease in oil production on federal public lands and waters from 2010 to 2011, and an 11% decrease in gas production from 2010 to 2011. Again, the President has made it easier. The President has not made it easier, but he must make it easier to produce American energy. The President can begin by increasing the number of permits issued for exploration in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, it's my understanding that there are only 25 deepwater rigs active in the Gulf right now. I understand that 34 deepwater rigs were active in the Gulf at this time in 2010. The administration needs to approve more permits and to do it immediately. The President should also increase access to other offshore areas. He should provide access to offshore areas in the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. In November, the President proposed an offshore oil and gas leasing plan that amazingly excluded the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. He excluded areas off the coast of Virginia, even though both of the senators, both members of this body, who are Democrats, as well as the governor of Virginia, who is a Republican, all of them support such exploration. The President should also increase access to onshore areas. The President should open up areas of Alaska. And we should support proposals to open up ANWR. Both senators, a Democrat and a Republican, and the governor of Alaska strongly support opening up ANWR for energy exploration. The President should, too. The President should also take steps to facilitate onshore production in the West. Specifically, the President should scrap new regulations requiring master leasing and development plans. These regulations were put into place over 2 years ago by the Secretary of Interior. It's unclear to me why the Secretary issued these regulations. They add more red tape, they cause more bureaucratic delay, and they slow down American energy production. Now, of course, there are other regulations that are driving up the cost of American energy. Specifically, the EPA's forthcoming Tier 3 regulations. That will affect America's refineries. A recent study shows that this rule could increase the cost of manufacturing gasoline by 6 to 9 cents a gallon. This rule could also raise annual compliance costs for refineries by billions of dollars and it will almost certainly increase the pain at the pump that's being felt by American families. To me, this is unacceptable. The President should, at the very least, delay the issuance of this rule. In addition to providing more access to federal lands and waters and eliminating burdensome regulations, the President should address delivery bottlenecks. Specifically, he should address all the bottlenecks that the Keystone XL pipeline would relieve. Here, of course, I'm referring to the 100,000 barrels of oil each day that Keystone would ship from Montana and North Dakota. That's right, homegrown American energy from Montana and North Dakota. Right now, there isn't sufficient pipeline capacity out of North Dakota and Montana. You know how they're getting the oil out of there? Well, they're shipping it on trucks and in trains, and that's a lot more expensive than shipping it by pipeline. The Keystone XL pipeline would reduce the cost of shipping American oil. In addition, the pipeline would ship about 700,000 barrels of oil a day from Canada. The Canadian oil would replace oil imports from OPEC and thus increase our nation's energy security. Approving the Keystone XL pipeline is an easy decision, and the President should make that decision immediately. Again, the President must abandon his support for policies such as this legislation that's ahead of us today, which will only increase the pain at the pump. And we must abandon plans which will put our nation's security further at risk. Instead, the President must make it easier to produce American energy. He should increase access to federal public lands and waters, eliminate costly regulations, and approve the Keystone XL pipeline. It is my hope the President will take all of these steps and do so immediately so the American public does not continue to suffer the significant pain at the pump that continues to affect our country today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.